It's 1971. You spent 7 years building a business that finally works. 70% market share, the category is yours. And then you find out, quietly, indirectly, that your only supplier is shopping for a better partner. That's where Phil Knight was. Blue Ribbon Sports, his company, didn't own factories. It didn't own patents. It didn't own a brand anyone would recognize on a shoe. What it owned was a distribution agreement with a Japanese shoe manufacturer. And that agreement was suddenly optional. Here's the decision Knight faced. Do you defend the relationship that feeds you today, or do you start building the thing that might keep you alive tomorrow, knowing that if your current partner finds out, they can cut you off immediately? Welcome to Unstoppable. This episode is about Phil Knight, the creation of Nike, and one specific move, building the alternative before he had permission, before he had resources, and technically, before he was even allowed to. If you know Knight today, you know the end of the story. Nike, global sportswear giant, billions in brand value, the swoosh everywhere. But in 1971, there was no Nike. There was a fragile company called Blue Ribbon Sports, importing running shoes from Japan, run out of a scrappy operation of true believers, including Knight and his former track coach, Bill Bowerman. They had no factories, no brand anyone recognized, no backup supplier. And they were contractually tied to Onitsuka, the very company now looking for a U.S. distributor. That's the only reason this decision matters. Knight wasn't choosing between two mature options. He was choosing between trying to protect a relationship where he had no leverage, or manufacturing leverage from thin air. So let's get into Knight's decision room as it actually was. At stake, the entire business he'd spent 7 years building, the livelihood of his small team, his partnership with Bowerman, who had trusted him and lent his credibility to the Blue Ribbon operation. If Blue Ribbon lost Onitsuka, it didn't lose a client, it lost its only product. Constraints? First, no confirmed alternative supplier. Knight had theories. He had contacts in Japan, but nothing signed. Nothing he could switch to on Monday morning. Second, no brand identity. Runners knew Tiger, Onitsuka's shoes. They didn't know Blue Ribbon, which was the company who brought those shoes to America. The perceived value set with the Japanese logo on the side of the shoe, not with Knight's company bringing them to the U.S. Third, no manufacturing capability. No factories, no production lines, no in-house design and development engine that could spin up an entirely new line of footwear on demand. Fourth, a contractual non-compete with Onitsuka. On paper, if he moved first, if he started building an alternative brand while still under contract, he would be in breach. Legally vulnerable, financially exposed. And there's the tension. If Knight acted preemptively, sourced shoes from another manufacturer, started building his own brand, designed his own identity, he risked the exact thing he feared. Onitsuka cutting Blue Ribbon off early, before the new brand was ready. But if he waited, and Onitsuka calmly chose another distributor, he would wake up one morning with nothing to sell and no time to build. This is the trap a lot of operators live in without naming it. Act early, and you might blow up the only thing keeping you alive. Wait, and you might get cut off with no alternative at the worst possible time. That's the decision room that Knight was sitting in. Now, he had 3 real choices. Option A, play defense. Go back to Onitsuka, act surprised, and try to renegotiate a new long-term exclusive. Sweeten the deal, improve terms, sell them on loyalty and history. This is the default move almost anyone would suggest. Protect the relationship. We built this together. Let's lock in the next decade. On paper, it looks reasonable, mature, risk-aware. Option B, wait and hope. Assume your performance wins. Keep executing, keep growing the U.S. market for Tiger shoes, and trust that Onitsuka would see reason and stay with Blue Ribbon. In other words, don't rock the boat. No legal risk, no side deals, just faith that being a good partner is enough. Option C, which is the one Knight ultimately chose. Keep operating Blue Ribbon as if nothing had changed while secretly building a new brand in parallel. Find a trading company in Japan that would finance and arrange manufacturing, design a new logo, create a new name, stand up a completely separate identity under the surface so that if or when Onitsuka pulled the plug, Blue Ribbon wouldn't be staring into the abyss. They would have Nike. Notice something important here. Option C was not wait until the contract ends and then start. It was build the alternative before you have permission, while you still technically belong to someone else. That's what makes this story more than just an origin story. Knight wasn't choosing between safe and risky. He was choosing between two different kinds of risk. Legal and relational risk now, or existential business-ending risk later. Now here's what Knight actually did. He found a partner, a Japanese trading company with enough reach and capital to help him source manufacturing outside of Onitsuka's ecosystem. With this company's help, he began quietly developing a new line of shoes that would not carry the tiger logo. He commissioned a logo from a design student, Carolyn Davidson, the swoosh, for $35. He named the new brand Nike, all while Blue Ribbon was still officially Onitsuka's U.S. distributor. Shoes were still shipping under the Tiger branding, invoices were still being paid. Onitsuka believed they were still in an exclusive relationship. Blue Ribbon was two companies at once, the one Onitsuka could see and the one Knight knew he would need if, or more likely when, Onitsuka decided they would get a better deal elsewhere. Eventually, Onitsuka discovered what was happening. Legal action followed. The relationship ended. This is the part where most people imagine a cliff. But because Knight had already done the pre-work, committed to the path, and built enough of an alternative, Nike was not a theory. It was ready. When Onitsuka terminated the relationship, Knight didn't start from zero. He flipped the switch. Is that reckless? Maybe. Is it clean? Absolutely not. But look at the logic. If one party already holds all the leverage, the only way to rebalance the relationship is to create an option they don't control. Knight understood that trying to fix the relationship would keep him in a dependency he could never escape. Building Nike wasn't just a backup plan, it was a leverage play. Onitsuka sued, Knight fought. The courts ultimately sided with Blue Ribbon. The legal risk he took, the technical breach, the parallel development, didn't wipe him out. It became a chapter in the story of a company that suddenly had its own name, its own logo, its own designs. From there, Nike grew. The company went public in 1980. Over time, what began as a defensive hedge, a brand built out of fear of losing everything, became the dominant global sportswear company. The swoosh moved from $35 student work to one of the most valuable symbols on earth. The thing that created the value wasn't a clean launch plan. It was a decision made in the most uncomfortable position possible, dependent on a single supplier, legally constrained, and already out of leverage. Knight's answer to that constraint was not protect what I have. It was use what I have to build something they can't take away. So there are three principles that live inside this story. They're simple to say, but hard to live. Principle 1, build the alternative before you need it. Knight's best time to build Nike was not after Onitsuka formally cut him off. By then, it would have been too late. The worst possible moment to plan a transition is when your current platform has already disappeared. That's when you have the least time, the least leverage, and the most panic in the system. So he did the opposite. While Blue Ribbon still held the U.S. running market for Tiger shoes, while cash was still coming in, while the relationship still technically existed, he started building the replacement. This principle is brutal in its simplicity. If there's a single point of dependency that could kill you in 90 days, the time to build your alternative is now, while that dependency is still feeding you. Don't wait for your only client to leave you before you diversify. You don't wait for your one platform to change the algorithm before you build your own list. You don't wait for the internal sponsor of your project to retire before you build broader support. The move is the same. Use the stability you have to build the option that will keep you stable when that relationship ends. And yes, it might look disloyal or paranoid or premature on the spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet never includes the cost of being trapped. Principle 2. Single source dependency is an existential risk, not a performance problem. Blue Ribbon hadn't done anything wrong in the classic sense. They had grown the Tiger brand in the U.S. They held 70% of the market. Onitsuka's interest in other distributors didn't show up because Knight underperformed. It showed up because dependency cuts both ways. If one party controls the product and the other is replaceable, the power is not symmetric. Knight's real vulnerability wasn't that he might lose a contract. It was that he had allowed his entire business to exist in a position where one external decision could zero him out. That's the principle. It doesn't matter how strong the relationship looks today. If your business, your career, or your project rests on one supplier, one client, one platform, or one internal sponsor. That is not focus. That is existential risk. And the danger is that if it feels fine, in fact, it often feels better than fine. The revenue is predictable. The relationship is warm. The feedback is good, which is exactly why operators don't move until the calendar reminder comes in that the contract is up for renewal, or the email arrives out announcing a new strategic direction, or your sponsor calls to say they're leaving the company. By that point, you're reacting. Knight refused to accept that. He treated the dependency itself as the risk, not the behavior inside the relationship. Principle 3, the forced transition window is also your maximum creative window. Nike did not come from comfort. It came from the feeling of a door about to close. Knight didn't sit down one day in a calm market with diversified suppliers and decide to add a second brand to his portfolio. He moved when the clock started ticking. That pressure created urgency, and urgency, properly directed, becomes creativity. He didn't have the luxury of over-optimizing. He couldn't spend 3 years workshopping the perfect name or logo. He had to move. And that constraint forced clarity. What is the smallest possible set of decisions we need to make to be able to stand on our own feet if we're cut off? Name, logo, manufacturing path, product that is good enough to sell. Not perfect branding, not a perfect org chart, just enough to live. The principle here is not wait for a crisis so you can become creative. It's this. When you see that a forced transition is coming, when you can feel the dependency starting to tilt, that window is your best chance to do a real, non-cosmetic change because you're finally willing to do things that would have felt too extreme when everything looks safe. The question is whether you use that window intentionally or let it use you. From the outside, Knight's move looks reckless. He was technically in breach of his agreement. He risked lawsuits. The most reasonable operators, especially inside larger organizations, would have gone straight to the adult playbook. Call the partner, renegotiate, protect the relationship, preserve the status quo. But look at the power dynamics. Onitsuka already had the leverage. They owned the product. They could choose another distributor. They were already looking. What exactly was Knight going to negotiate from that position? A slightly longer fuse on the same bomb? He understood something uncomfortable. When the other side already holds all the cards, preserving the relationship doesn't restore your power. It just keeps you dependent longer. The only real countermove was to create something they didn't own. That's the contrarian move here. Not burn bridges for fun, not ignore contracts. It's reading the power dynamics clearly enough to see when the relationship you're trying to save is actually the thing preventing you from ever being independent. So let's pull this out of Phil Knight's story and drop it into your life. You may not be running a shoe company. You might be working inside a large organization, leading a program, running a team, or building something on nights and weekends. The pattern is the same. Start by auditing your single points of failure. Where are you one decision away from a cliff? Maybe it's one major client that makes up 60% of your revenue. One executive sponsor whose support is the only thing keeping your project funded. One channel, one social platform, one internal favorite that drives nearly all your inbound opportunities. One supplier who controls your critical component or capability. Pick one of those and ask a brutal question. If this ended in 90 days, no renewal, no warning, no replacement, what would I do? Not what would I like to do someday? What would I actually have to build, scramble, or cobble together just to stay alive? That answer, messy as it might be, is your Nike. Then the move is simple, not easy. Start building that answer now, while the relationship still looks fine. If it's a client dependency, start deliberately cultivating smaller accounts or a second anchor client, even though it makes your next quarter's numbers harder. If it's an internal sponsor, actively build a coalition of stakeholders who understand the value of your work, even though it means more meetings and less focus. If it's a platform, start building an owned list or a second channel, even though the returns look tiny compared to your main source of traffic. You will feel disloyal. You will feel like you're cheating on your current success. You will be tempted to wait one more year, one more cycle, until this next phase is stable. That's exactly how dependencies turn from manageable to existential. Phil Knight didn't wait for permission. He used the window while he still had something to stand on to build the thing that would keep him standing when the platform disappeared. The question is, where in your life are you still hoping the incumbent will choose you instead of quietly building the thing they can never take away? You don't need Nike's scale to apply this. You just need the courage to build your next move while the current one still looks safe, because by the time you're forced to jump, it's already too late to start building the bridge. What's the one dependency you're going to start quietly replacing before anyone else thinks you need to? Until next time, stay unstoppable.